to Deep Sleep Stories. If these stories have helped you through restless nights, please leave a review. Reviews are what help this podcast grow, reach more listeners, and stay alive. Without them, even something meaningful can slowly disappear. So if this show has brought you comfort, that small act truly helps keep it going. Now, settle in, and let's begin.
Welcome, dear listener, to Deep Sleep Stories. Tonight you're invited into a quiet coastal evening where an old sea captain's porch looks out over moonlit water and the world slows to a gentle, steady rhythm. Settle in now exactly as you are. Let your shoulders drop a little as if a warm blanket has been placed there. Let your jaw soften. Let the muscles around your eyes loosen as though they're learning a new kind of rest. Take a slow breath in, unhurried, and let it go even more slowly. Feel how the air arrives without effort and leaves without effort. There is nothing you need to do besides listening. Nothing you need to solve. No place you need to go. Imagine, for a moment, the simplest kind of evening. The kind that doesn't ask for anything, the kind that only offers a quiet view and the company of peaceful sounds. The sea's hush, the whisper of wind, the small, friendly creak of wood beneath a porch chair. Breathe in again. Let the breath travel down into the belly like a wave making its way toward shore. Breathe out and feel yourself becoming heavier, calmer, more at ease. Now in your mind you begin to notice a shoreline just beyond dusk. It isn't sharp or bright. It's softened, as if painted with a brush dipped in twilight. The sky holds fading peach and cool lavender, and the first stars appear like tiny lanterns being lit one at a time. As you listen, you can let everything else drift away. Let the day become a far-off place, quiet and distant, like a boat that has already turned toward the horizon. And when you're ready, without rushing, you can step into the story. In a small harbor town where the sea spoke in murmurs and the streets remembered countless footsteps, there stood a weathered cottage near the edge of the dunes. It was not grand, and it did not try to impress anyone. It simply belonged there, the way a smooth stone belongs in the palm. The cottage had a porch that faced the water. Its boards were pale and worn, silvered by salt air and seasons of sun. The railing was rounded by time, and small knots in the wood made gentle patterns like sleepy eyes. A lantern hung beside the door, its glass fogged slightly, as if it had spent years breathing in mist. The old sea captain lived there. No one in town called him by his full name anymore. Names in a place like that became simpler over time, softened by familiarity. To the fishers who rose before dawn, he was captain. To the children who played with driftwood and shells, he was simply the old sailor. And to the sea itself, which knew everyone in its wide, patient way, he was just another heartbeat on the shore. He moved slowly these days, not from weakness exactly, but from a learned gentleness. His body had known storms and hard work and long voyages. It had learned to respect the pace of things. It had learned that forcing the world did not make it kinder. Every evening, As the light began to sink and the harbor grew quiet, the captain stepped onto his porch with a small, familiar ritual. He carried a mug that smelled of chamomile and honey. Sometimes there was a thin slice of lemon floating on the surface like a pale moon. Sometimes it was just steam rising into the cooling air. He would settle into his chair, an old rocking chair with curved arms polished smooth by years of hands, and he would listen. The porch was a listening place. It held the sea's breath, the sigh of wind moving through sea grass, the faint clink of a buoy rope against a post, and the distant, sleepy call of gulls as they tucked their heads beneath their wings. A person could sit there and feel, without thinking too hard, that the world was not rushing. That time was not chasing anyone. That everything was simply unfolding, one small moment at a time. The captain liked that feeling. Some evenings, the town drifted toward him in small, quiet ways. A neighbor might pass by with a basket of laundry and offer a nod. A cat might appear from beneath the porch, stepping into the fading light as though it had been invited by the evening itself. A child might wander close, careful and curious, and look out at the water as if expecting it to answer a secret question. But mostly the porch belonged to the captain and the sea. And the sea in return gave him stories. Not loud stories, not dramatic ones, but subtle tales carried in the shape of waves and the pattern of foam. Stories written in the salt that dried on the railing and the way the tide changed its voice, depending on the moon. On one especially gentle night when the air was mild and the sky wore a thin veil of cloud, the captain stepped outside and paused at the threshold. Something felt different, not in a troubling way, more like the feeling of noticing a familiar song played at a slightly slower tempo. The notes were the same, but the spaces between them had changed. He listened. The sea was quiet, quieter than usual, as if it were holding its breath. The wind, too, seemed to move more carefully, brushing the porch with soft fingertips. The captain took one step onto the boards, then another. His bare feet felt the cool wood, and he smiled faintly at the steady, comforting sensation. He lowered himself into the rocking chair with a soft creak and let the chair rock once, then twice, the motion small and soothing. He brought the mug to his lips. The tea was warm and sweet, and then he noticed it. At the far end of the porch, near the railing where the light grew thin, there was a small object that had not been there before. It was not large. It was not threatening. It simply rested there as though it belonged. The captain's eyes, used to reading the sea and sky, took it in without urgency. He set his mug down carefully on a small table, and the chair stopped rocking. He stood slow and steady and walked toward the object. It was a shell, not an ordinary shell, though it held the familiar curve and spiral shape of one. This shell seemed to catch the dim light in a way that made it appear softly luminous, as if the moon had left a pale fingerprint on its surface. Its colors were gentle, cream and pearl, and a faint blush of pink. like a sunrise remembered. The captain bent down and lifted it in his palm. It was warm. That alone was unusual because shells found near the sea were usually cool, holding the memory of water. But this shell felt as if it had been resting near a small, hidden flame. He turned it slightly, letting his thumb trace its ridges. The shell was smooth in places, textured in others, and as he moved it, he heard something faint, a sound inside it, not the usual rushing echo of ocean that many shells held. This was different. It was quieter, softer, more like a whisper. The captain raised the shell to his ear. At first he heard nothing but his own gentle breath and the distant hush of the tide. Then, slowly, a sound emerged, a low, melodic tone, like a lullaby played far away. It rose and fell in a calm rhythm, and within it, the captain could almost make out words. Not words that demanded understanding, but words that felt like comfort. He closed his eyes. The porch seemed to fade around the edges. The air thickened with a kind of peaceful magic, and the captain felt something inside him loosen like a knot gently untied. He was not afraid. A lifetime at sea had taught him that the unknown was not always dangerous. Sometimes the unknown was simply a doorway. Sometimes it was a gift. When he opened his eyes again, the world looked the same, but softer. The lantern beside the door glowed a little warmer. The sky outside seemed deeper, its clouds moving like slow drifting ships. He carried the shell back to his chair and sat down. The chair rocked once, then twice. He held the shell in both hands, resting it on his lap, and listened to the lullaby inside. As he listened, the porch began to feel larger. Not physically larger, but wider, in a way that made room for memory. The captain's mind drifted back to nights on the ocean when the stars spilled across the sky like scattered salt. He remembered the sound of waves against a wooden hull, the way the ship rose and fell as if it were breathing. He remembered the feeling of being held by something vast. The lullaby in the shell seemed to braid itself with those memories, weaving the past and present together in a calm, gentle pattern. On the edge of his awareness, the captain sensed movement. A figure approached along the sandy path that led toward the cottage. The captain did not startle. He simply looked up, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. A woman was walking toward the porch. She moved slowly, as if she had all the time in the world. Her hair was dark and long, and it seemed to shimmer slightly, like wet seaweed catching moonlight. Her dress was the color of mist, pale and flowing, and it did not pick up sand as it brushed the ground. She reached the bottom of the porch steps and paused. The captain sat quietly, the shell still in his lap. He felt in some deep part of himself that this was connected. The shell, the hush of the sea, the softness of the night. The woman looked up at him with eyes that reflected the faint light like tide pools. "Good evening," she said, and her voice sounded like water moving over stones. "Evening," the captain replied, his voice low and steady. They regarded one another with the calm recognition of two beings who had met in a dream long ago. "You've found something that belongs to the sea," the woman said gently. The captain glanced down at the shell, then back at her. "It found me, I think." The woman's smile was small and kind. The sea has a way of placing gifts where they are needed. The captain shifted slightly in his chair, letting it rock once. "Who are you?" The woman's gaze drifted toward the water beyond the dunes. "A listener," she said. "A keeper of quiet things. Some call me the tide keeper, though names are only nets, and I prefer not to be caught." The captain nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense. "And this shell?" "It is a porch shell," she said, and her eyes warmed with amusement. "A simple thing, meant for simple evenings. It carries the sea's lullaby in a gentler form. The sea is vast, and sometimes its voice can be too large for a weary heart. So it makes smaller songs, tucked into spirals, offered to those who listen." The captain's fingers traced the shell's curve. "Why leave it here?" The tidekeeper stepped up onto the porch, her feet making no sound on the boards. She moved toward the railing and rested her hand there, looking out at the dark water. "Because this porch," she said softly, "is a place where the boundary between land and sea becomes thin. It is a bridge made of wood and patience. And you, Captain, have spent your life crossing boundaries. You are good at standing in doorways." The captain let out a quiet breath that could almost have been a laugh. "I suppose I have." They fell into a peaceful silence. The rocking chair creaked gently as the captain moved, and the porch lantern hummed faintly. The sea remained quiet, as if listening too. After a while, the tidekeeper spoke again. "May I sit?" The captain gestured toward a second chair, a simple wooden chair with a faded cushion. "Please." She sat with graceful ease, and for a moment the porch felt like a small sanctuary floating in darkness. The captain listened to the shell. The lullaby inside it was clearer now, as though it welcomed the tidekeeper's presence. It sounded like waves folding into themselves, like the hush of foam smoothing over sand, like a song sung without words. The tidekeeper closed her eyes. "Do you hear it?" she asked. The captain nodded. "A song," he said quietly. "A calm one." "It's the sea remembering," she murmured. "Not the storms, not the shipwrecks, not the desperate things. This is the sea remembering moonlight, remembering gentle tides, remembering the way it cradles sleeping creatures beneath its surface." The captain's shoulders softened. He had known storms, he had known fear, but he had also known long stretches of quiet sea, flat as glass, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it was hard to tell which world was above and which was below. Those were the moments he returned to now, and the shell's lullaby guided him there. The tidekeeper opened her eyes and looked at him. "Will you walk with me?" she asked. The captain did not hesitate. He rose carefully and set the shell in his pocket as though it were something precious. He reached for a shawl hanging near the door, a thick knit smelling faintly of cedar, and draped it around his shoulders. They stepped off the porch and into the night. The sandy path led toward the dunes. Tall grasses swayed, whispering among themselves. The air tasted of salt and distant rain. The tidekeeper walked beside the captain, and though she moved with an otherworldly grace, her presence did not feel strange. It felt fitting, like a calm thought arriving at the right time. They reached the top of the dunes where the beach stretched wide and pale. The sea lay beyond, dark and softly glimmering. A thin line of moonlight lay across the water like a ribbon. The captain breathed in. The air filled his lungs and seemed to rinse them clean. The tidekeeper lifted her hand, and in that simple motion, the world seemed to grow quieter, not silent but hushed, as though the night itself leaned in to listen. "Long ago," she said, "there was a captain who built a porch, not only for resting but for remembering. He did not know it at the time. He simply wanted a place where the sea could be seen, where the wind could be felt, where the day could end gently. But porches can become something more. They can become lanterns for the soul." The captain's gaze remained on the water. "I built it because I missed the horizon," he admitted. "Even after I stopped sailing, I missed looking out and seeing distance." "And now you have it," the tidekeeper said. "Distance and closeness. Both." They walked slowly along the shoreline, their footprints appearing briefly in damp sand before the tide softened their edges. The captain enjoyed that, how the sea erased without harshness, how it smoothed, how it forgave. The shell in his pocket hummed gently, its lullaby barely audible, more felt than heard. It was like a warm stone against his leg. As they walked, the tidekeeper pointed toward the water where something faintly glowed beneath the surface. At first, the captain thought it was moonlight, but then he saw small points of pale blue, moving in gentle swirls. "Bioluminescence," the captain murmured, remembering nights at sea when the water had sparked like stardust. "Yes," the tidekeeper said, "the sea's quiet lanterns." They paused and watched. The glowing points drifted and gathered, forming soft patterns that appeared and faded like a slow dance. The captain felt calm spread through him like warm tea. The tidekeeper crouched and dipped her fingertips into the water. When she lifted her hand, droplets clung to her skin, glowing faintly before fading. "Would you like to leave something behind?" she asked. The captain blinked. "Leave something?" "A worry," she said gently. "A regret. Something heavy. The sea can carry it, not as a burden, but as something it knows how to dissolve." The captain looked down at the sand. He thought of old memories that still sometimes tightened in his chest. Moments of harsh weather, words spoken too sharply, Nights spent awake with fear. He did not want to press into those thoughts. This was not a night for digging deeply, but he could acknowledge the shape of a heaviness, and that was enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the shell. The lullaby seemed to brighten as if it approved. The tidekeeper watched quietly. The captain held the shell in both hands and closed his eyes. He imagined gently that he was placing something heavy into the shell. Not an entire story, not something sharp, just the feeling of weight itself gathered like a small stone. He breathed in, and as he breathed out, he imagined that weight settling into the shell's spiral. When he opened his eyes, the shell looked the same, but his chest felt looser. The tidekeeper nodded. "Now," she said softly, "place it where it can rest." The captain walked to the edge of the water where the tide lapped gently. He crouched, the sand cool beneath his feet, and set the shell down just where the waves could reach it. A small wave arrived and touched the shell, rocking it slightly. The shell caught moonlight and glimmered. Then another wave arrived and another, each one a calm hand smoothing over it. The captain watched as the tide slowly took the shell, turning it, guiding it. The lullaby faded into the sea's own voice, as if it was returning home. He stood again, feeling lighter. The tidekeeper's gaze softened. "You've done well," she said. "The sea does not ask for perfection, only honesty, only a willing breath." They continued walking, their pace unhurried. Soon ahead, the captain saw a small light flickering near the dunes. At first, it seemed like a lantern, but it moved too gently, like something floating. As they drew closer, the captain realized it was not a lantern at all. It was a cluster of tiny lights, fireflies, though he did not usually see them near the sea. They hovered above a patch of dune flowers, blinking in slow rhythm. The flowers were pale and small, their petals trembling in the breeze. The tidekeeper smiled. "Sometimes," she said, "the land offers its own lullaby." The captain watched, enchanted by the quiet persistence of those little lights. They did not rush. They did not flash wildly. They blinked as though practicing patience. The captain felt sleepiness begin to gather around the edges of his mind like a soft fog. They turned back toward the cottage. The porch waited, a familiar silhouette against the night. The lantern beside the door glowed warmly, inviting them to return. As they stepped onto the boards, the captain noticed how the wood felt underfoot, steady, grounded, like an old friend. He sat in his rocking chair again, and the tidekeeper returned to the other chair. The night wrapped around them. The sea had resumed its gentle murmur, no longer holding its breath. It spoke softly now, as if satisfied. The captain's mug of tea was still on the table, the steam faint but present. He lifted it and took a sip. It was cooler but still sweet. The tidekeeper rested her hands on her lap and looked out at the water. "This porch," she said, "is a place where the sea and the land meet politely. It is a place of pause, a place where endings become beginnings without anyone noticing. The captain rocked slowly. The chair's motion was like a lullaby of its own. Forward, back, forward, back. I used to think, the captain said quietly, that I needed to keep moving, that if I stopped, something would catch up to me. Time, maybe, or regret. The tidekeeper's gaze remained on the horizon line, barely visible in darkness. And now? The captain considered. Now I think stopping can be a kind of sailing, he said. Sailing inward. The tidekeeper nodded, as though she had heard that truth before. They sat together for a long time listening. The sea breathed, the porch creaked. The wind moved through grasses with soft, brushing sounds. The captain's eyelids grew heavy. He did not fight it. He did not try to hold on to wakefulness. He simply allowed the night to do what it always did, carry the world toward rest. At some point, the tidekeeper stood. The captain noticed the movement through half-lidded eyes. She stepped to the railing and placed her hand there, as if offering thanks to the wood, to the porch, to the quiet. Then she turned to the captain. Her eyes were gentle. "It is time," she whispered, "for the porch to do its best work." The captain's mouth curved in a small, sleepy smile. "And what's that?" "To hold you," she said, "while you drift." He nodded, barely moving. The tidekeeper stepped toward the porch steps, her dress blending with the misty air. Before she descended, she looked back once more. "If you listen closely," she said, voice like the tide, "you will always hear the sea's softer songs." And then she was gone. Not in a sudden way, not like a vanishing, but like a wave retreating, present, and then simply elsewhere. The captain remained in his rocking chair, the porch around him like a cradle. The sea's voice was steady. The lantern's glow was warm. The world felt safe. Now the pace begins to slow, softer and softer, like a candle dimming. The old sea captain lets his hands rest on the chair's arms. His fingers loosen, his shoulders sink. The rocking becomes smaller, as if the chair is learning to sleep too. The night air cools his cheeks. It is gentle. It is kind. The sea continues its hush. In and out. In and out. The porch boards hold steady beneath him. The railing stands quietly. The lantern watches over everything without needing to be bright. The captain's breathing becomes slow, deep, easy. The harbor town sleeps behind him. Windows dark, streets quiet, dreams beginning in small rooms. Above, the stars remain, patient, calm, and here on the porch, everything is allowed to rest. If any thoughts drift through the captain's mind, They pass like distant clouds. If any memories appear, they soften, then fade, like footprints near the tide. The rocking chair moves once, and then again, and then hardly at all. The captain's eyes close. The sea sings without words. The porch holds him. The night wraps him gently like a warm blanket pulled up to the chin. And you, listening now, can let your own body feel heavy. Let the breath be slow. Let the mind become quiet. There is nothing else to do. Only this calm. Only this soft, steady evening. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well